It's 3 in the morning, and you're awake browsing meditation videos, reading about chakras or researching ayahuasca. 6 months ago, you bought crystals that promised to align your energy. Last month, you enrolled in a mindfulness retreat that cost more than your rent, and now you're seriously considering traveling to Peru to find your life purpose with a shaman you met on Instagram. You pause for a moment and ask yourself, when did this desperate search for something you can't even clearly define begin? This scene repeats in millions of homes every night. An entire generation has turned spirituality into a consumption project, transforming the ancestral thirst for transcendence into a spiritual shopping list. But here's what no one tells you. Your modern spiritual search isn't a quest for the sacred. It's a disguised escape, masquerading as personal growth. The philosopher Søren Kierkegaard described existential anguish as the dizziness of freedom, that sensation of standing at the edge of an abyss, knowing you have absolute freedom to jump, but also complete responsibility not to. Modern spiritual seeking is exactly that, the vertigo of living in an era where all traditional structures of meaning have collapsed, and now you have to build your own belief system from scratch. Our grandparents didn't need to find themselves because they already knew who they were. Religion, family, community, lifelong work provided them with solid identity and clear purpose. But we grew up in the era of infinite options, where every existential choice became a personal crisis. There's no longer one story that gives meaning to our lives. There are thousands of stories competing for our attention, and each promises to be the truth that will finally complete us. Carl Jung observed that when organized religions lost their power to give meaning, the collective unconscious began projecting the need for the sacred elsewhere. What Jung couldn't foresee was that in the 21st century, that projection would become a multi-billion-dollar industry. Each year we spend more money on spiritual growth than many countries spend on education, but levels of existential anxiety keep rising. Why? Because we've confused spirituality with entertainment, transcendence with therapy, and awakening with consumption. Think about it. How many times have you believed that the next technique, the next book, the next retreat, or the next guru would finally give you that inner peace you seek so much? It's as if we were addicted to the promise of awakening, but terribly allergic to the actual process of transformation. Because true spirituality requires something modern culture has made almost impossible, staying still long enough to face what we really are. Modern spiritual seeking develops in 3 psychological stages that function like a downward spiral into illusion until we finally hit bottom and begin the real inner work. The first stage is what we could call the awakening of the spiritual consumer. Something in your life breaks. A relationship, a job, an existential crisis, or simply that growing sensation of emptiness no distraction can fill. In that moment of vulnerability, you discover there's an entire universe of practices, philosophies, and transformation promises waiting for you with open arms. This stage feels like a rebirth. Each book you read, each video you watch, each practice you try gives you a temporary discharge of hope and meaning. It's the spiritual honeymoon phase, where everything seems possible, and each day brings a new revelation. You buy books on Buddhism, download meditation apps, follow spiritual influencers who seem to have all the universe's wisdom condensed in Instagram posts. You feel special, as if you'd discovered a secret the rest of the ignorant world doesn't yet understand. But here's where psychology becomes fascinating. What's really happening in this stage isn't spiritual awakening, but a transfer of dependency. Before, you depended on traditional external structures for your identity and purpose. Now you depend on alternative external structures. The ego, which you're supposedly trying to transcend, has simply found a new way to feed itself. Instead of feeling superior for having the best job or biggest house, it now feels superior for being more conscious, more awakened, more elevated than the sleeping masses. The second stage arrives when the novelty fades and you realize that despite having tried dozens of spiritual practices, you're still basically the same person with the same problems. This is the frantic search phase. If one technique didn't work, it must be because it wasn't the right technique. If one teacher disappointed you, it must be because they weren't the authentic teacher. The problem is never you. It's always that you haven't found the perfect practice, the perfect teaching, the perfect experience that will finally liberate you. In this stage, spiritual seeking becomes a sophisticated form of avoiding real spirituality. You jump from tradition to tradition like a spiritual tourist, collecting experiences but carefully avoiding any practice that requires real commitment or genuine confrontation with yourself. You meditate when you feel stressed, but abandon the practice as soon as uncomfortable emotions arise. You read about detachment, but desperately cling to the idea of your own spiritual growth. You talk about universal love, but mercilessly judge those who don't share your level of consciousness. The paradox of this stage is that the more you seek awakening, the more asleep you become to the reality of your own experience. You become an expert in spiritual concepts, but a novice in the practical application of wisdom. You can recite Buddha's teachings, but can't sit in silence for 10 minutes without your mind scattering in 1,000 directions. You know the theory of unconditional love, but still react with resentment every time someone doesn't meet your expectations. The third stage is the most dangerous but also most necessary: spiritual collapse. It's the moment when you realize you've not only made no spiritual progress, but you may be more lost than when you started. All that accumulation of spiritual knowledge hasn't made you wiser, only more confused. All those teachers and teachings haven't liberated you. They've only created more dependencies and expectations. You face a devastating truth. You've been using spirituality as a sophisticated drug to avoid facing the fundamental reality of your existence. This collapse feels like death. The image you had of yourself as someone on the spiritual path crumbles. You realize you've been running on a cosmic hamster wheel, believing you were moving toward enlightenment when you were actually just spinning in increasingly elaborate circles. It's the experience of what St. John of the Cross called the dark night of the soul, but in contemporary version, the dark night of the modern spiritual seeker who discovers their entire search has been an elaborate distraction. But here comes the insight that changes everything. The moment of revelation that transforms spiritual seeking from an escape into a return home. Real spirituality isn't something you acquire, it's something you strip away. It's not an accumulation of experiences, knowledge, or altered states of consciousness. It's the gradual recognition of what you already are when you remove all the layers of identification, expectation and seeking you've built around your basic experience of existing. Rumi expressed it perfectly 800 years ago. What you seek is seeking you. But the modern mind has interpreted this as an invitation to seek more intensely, when it's actually an invitation to stop seeking completely. What you seek isn't hidden in any mountain retreat, isn't stored in any sacred text, isn't available only after years of spiritual practice. It's here now, in this ordinary moment, in this mundane breath, in this simple consciousness that's reading these words. The deep psychology of modern spiritual seeking reveals we're not seeking the divine. We're fleeing the human. We don't want to transcend, we want to escape. We're not seeking awakening. We're seeking a more sophisticated anesthetic for the existential pain of being conscious in an apparently meaningless universe. But true spirituality begins exactly where spiritual seeking ends, in radical acceptance of what is, including your resistance to what is. This doesn't mean all spiritual practices are useless or all teachers are charlatans. It means real spiritual practice isn't a ladder to higher states of consciousness. But medicine for the disease of believing, you need to be somewhere different, from where you are now. Meditation isn't a technique to achieve enlightenment. It's an opportunity to familiarize yourself with the nature of your mind as it is. Prayer isn't a way to get what you want from the universe. It's a practice of surrendering what you think you need to be complete. True spiritual work isn't transcending your humanity, but inhabiting it completely. It's not freeing yourself from your emotions, but developing a mature relationship with them. It's not awakening from ordinary life, but awakening within it. It's the recognition that the sacred isn't a separate dimension you can access with the right techniques, but the intrinsic nature of the experience you're already having. Carl Jung dedicated his life to studying the human psyche and reached a radical conclusion. Individuation, the process of becoming who you really are, doesn't require becoming someone special. It requires stopping trying to be someone different. Neurosis, according to Jung, is the evasion of legitimate suffering. Modern spiritual seeking is often collective neurosis. Evasion of the legitimate suffering of being human in favor of fantasies about becoming something more than human. But when you finally surrender to your basic humanity, something extraordinary happens. You discover that what you were always seeking was never absent. The peace you sought in meditation is available in every moment you're not seeking peace. The love you hope to find in spiritual awakening is the basic nature of the consciousness that's experiencing whatever it's experiencing right now. The freedom you thought came with enlightenment is your present capacity to be aware of your lack of freedom without having to escape from it. This is the great secret the spiritual industry can't sell you because there's nothing to buy. You already are what you're seeking. You're not a spiritual seeker trying to find your true nature. Your true nature temporarily playing the game of seeking yourself. You don't need to awaken because you've never been asleep. You've just been dreaming you were asleep, and now you can wake up from the dream that you need to wake up. Real transformation doesn't come from adding more spiritual practices to your life, but from bringing complete awareness to the life you already have. It doesn't come from finding the perfect teacher, but from recognizing that every moment is your teacher, teaching you exactly what you need to learn about the nature of experience. It doesn't come from reaching special states of consciousness, but from fully inhabiting this ordinary state of consciousness that has never been absent. When you understand this viscerally, not conceptually, spiritual seeking doesn't end, it transforms. You no longer seek something outside your present experience to complete you. Instead, you explore with curiosity the present experience as the complete expression of the sacred. You no longer practice spirituality to get something. You practice as a celebration of what you already are. You no longer follow spiritual teachers as external authorities. You recognize the inherent wisdom in your own direct experience. Life becomes your spiritual practice. Every conversation is an opportunity to listen more deeply. Every challenge is an invitation to respond from a more authentic place. Every ordinary moment is a window into the extraordinary that has always been hidden in plain sight. You don't need to go anywhere special, do anything special, or become someone special. You just need to be completely present where you already are. Being completely who you already are. This is the final paradox of modern spiritual seeking. It ends where it began, but with completely different understanding. You return to your ordinary life, your imperfect relationships, your mundane work, your daily challenges, but now you see them with different eyes. You don't see them as obstacles to your spiritual growth, but as the perfect expression of your spiritual nature. You don't experience them as problems that need solving, but as the infinite dance of consciousness with itself. Spiritual maturity isn't the ability to access exotic states of consciousness. It's the ability to find the sacred in the apparently profane, the extraordinary in the apparently ordinary, the divine in the apparently human. It's the realization that you've never been separate from what you seek, never been lost from where you belong, never been disconnected from what you essentially are. If this message resonated with you, if you recognize your own search in these words, share it with someone who might need to hear that they're already enough as they are. And leave in the comments your own experience with spiritual seeking. What stage are you in? Have you experienced the spiritual collapse that precedes true awakening? Because although this journey is deeply personal, you're never alone in it. We're all finding our way back home to the simple truth of what we've always been.